I would spend so much time in my garden, one of the wettest Junes ever. The internet was so bad, humidity soaking through the wooden wall. What the fuck is going on? What's wrong with me? And then came the pandemic. Ah, man, whew. It was hard. Hello, fellow friends of the forests and the rivers and the trees and the bees. Welcome back to the 𝗪𝘀𝗁 podcast, coming home. And today we're trying something new. I'm sitting at one of my favorite places ever here in this area, in this beautiful serene nature, and it almost feels too sacred, too precious to sit here and talk into a camera. I'm going to show you the place. Yeah, this is really one of the biggest luxuries of living remotely, living isolated, to still find wild spots of nature that you can enjoy all by yourself. It's really a gift. So today's episode is titled The Dream versus the Reality of Living in Nature. If you haven't listened to any of the episodes yet, I recommend you to go and listen to the first and the second episode if you're curious about the love story with this land, how I ended up living here, and everything that came before. Yeah, landing here, settling here, building a life. So the first time I was ever in this region was in 2017. No, it actually was before. But it was this coming and returning and going and trying to stay longer and make it work. And it wasn't possible until then. And yeah, life floated me back into Berlin, where I never wanted to to land again, to settle again. But there I met my partner, who is now here with me, and we're building this life together. And yeah, I guess I'm taking this as a starting point, because yeah, it's really where I had set the decision for myself. Okay, I want to live in southern France. I want to live in this area. It's calling me. The rivers are calling me. The forests are calling me. I fell in love with some of the people here who are so connected to nature and live this simple life. And yeah, I had taken the decision. And then I met my partner, and I was like, well, you can come with me in my van. I just had bought a van, a very old one. And yeah, I asked him if he wants to join me. And I was very set in this desire, in this wish of permanently living here. But then, of course, the dynamic was a totally new one, because before I had always been traveling alone. I didn't have to make any compromises, and was just like really following my own needs, my own desires. And when Ben and I met, we of course had no clue where this would be going, our relationship. It was completely fresh. We just knew each other for a couple of weeks, months before we set on this journey. And it was interesting. I really tried to have like this open beginner's mind, and I really didn't have any attachment to where this relationship would go. But I had a lot of attachment to the dream of landing here and living here. So yeah, we had to move through this phase of getting to know each other and Ben also getting to know the land here. And the first weeks we really took our time to just travel and explore the area. We also explored a bit of Spain and the Catalan Pyrenees. And Ben, he was really skeptical, and I would say a bit scared of where had he gotten himself into. Just had left his whole life in Berlin behind and now was in the van with this white woman. And so after this period of traveling, we tried community living, living with friends or friends of friends. First we stayed a bit with Dave and Diana, who had a farm back then in 𝗪𝘆𝘀, where I was already co-facilitating the yoga retreats, and they had this huge piece of land and had already like set up a barn that they could transform into a community center or a retreat center. Finding this place, this family and all the structures in place already felt quite magical at the beginning, and I was like, oh my god, like everything is coming already together. But something never quite felt right for me with the land. Somehow I didn't have this strong connection with the land, and the longer we stayed there and talked with the family, it became clear that we had different visions and wishes of what we want to do in nature, offer in nature. Our next station was friends of friends that we got referred to who offered roofing, and they had a yurt where we could live in. And it was way too early in the relationship of Ben and I to even think about renting something together or purchasing something together, because we were still getting to know each other and figuring out who is this person. And this was quite an adventure, living at this tree nursery in the yurt. Like living in a yurt is such a special feeling, because you only have this thin fabric separating you from nature, and you're never really separated because you have all the sounds and the scents. And it was so simple, everything. I think we arrived in October or even November, so it was getting cold already, and we were heating with a wood stove. It was freaking cold every morning, and I just barely could get out of bed. I was just like wanting to cover myself with a blanket and not get out of there until the yurt had a certain temperature. And this was really like a threat in the beginning. I mean, in the beginning, honestly, it was like basically the whole time until we arrived in our house that we had pretty tricky housing situations. At the family before, we lived in a barn that was, well, it was basically just a wooden shack and not insulated. We didn't have any running water. One of the wettest Junes ever. It was raining so much, and I remember like the humidity just like soaking through the wooden walls and into our pillowcases. And at some point I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I can't, like, just my bones, my whole body just feels like humid and cold. And luckily we had the van, so we went to the ocean and had a couple of days of sun and warming up. Yeah, so this first year was overall really adventurous and just like trying out, getting to know each other. I was living off of savings, so for me it had like still really this like just traveling feeling, playful feeling, not too serious feeling. In 2019 it was when I realized, okay, if I really want to make this work, living here in this beautiful area, then I have to stay. I can't just leave all the time and get like swept away. But I have to stay here also in the winter and like see how can I rent something here? How can I live more permanently here? get to know the locals better, not just in this like travel spirit, but yeah, just finding out how is it to be here over a winter. This was also the moment when I had to start working again. I couldn't live off my savings any longer. So yeah, living in just yurts or barns wasn't up for discussion anymore, and it was about figuring out how to do that, working online, far away from the networks of the city of Berlin, and also yeah, just the physical spaces of yoga studios that have their own communities. And that was a moment when I realized, okay, I can't just do my hard work, which back at this time was facilitating the 𝘄𝗶𝗁𝗵 gatherings and facilitating, yeah, somatic practices online, facilitating groups online. And it just wasn't bringing enough money in. So I decided to pick up my work as a designer again and started creating websites for people again. And luckily that worked. And luckily also everything that I started online, the 𝘄𝗶𝗁𝗵 gatherings, I had one online course before that. It was really well received. So that was really encouraging and reassuring, making the experience to see, okay, this works. And then came the pandemic. Oh boy. So we were in a foreign country, far away from friends and family, just figuring out how does this self-employment thing while basically being on the road or living, yeah, in just these like temporary living situations, how does it work? I had just rented my first retreat space here in the area, was very excited about that, had workshops planned and festivals in Germany, and it was like really starting to pick up. And then the pandemic hit. But luckily, work-wise, it was kind of a blessing to me because I already had started working online. So when everybody was shifting, trying to figure out how does this work, I already had experience in this and I had this course that I could offer. And with the beginning of the pandemic, we also had so many issues in that house. Like we had a broken roof where water was coming in the ground floor. It was moldy and the whole atmosphere in the town shifted. There were like police patrols and it was just really not a nice place to be anymore. It felt absolutely crazy to live in the middle of nature, surrounded by mountains and forests, and people forbidding you to leave your house. It didn't make any sense to us, and it just felt very, well, I guess most of you know how it felt. And so we decided to move again. Luckily in this time, yeah, there was the possibility to live in Airbnb places for like just normal rents, because the people who had these places, they were grateful for anybody just staying in them. And that's what we did. But our bad luck with the places we stayed just continued, and we had a house that was just really dark and it was difficult to heat. And in this village, the internet was so bad. And that was something I didn't have in mind at all when moving to France, that there could be places where there's no actual internet connection you can work with. I imagine there's better Wi-Fi in the Himalayas, as in some French villages. So in this village where we arrived, the internet was so bad, I couldn't even upload an Instagram story. And yeah, I was still working on this online course, so I had to upload videos and sometimes hike up the mountain to do that with my mobile internet. So that was just really fucking stressful already. Then there was the pandemic. I had to cancel my retreat space. Of course, our workshops, in-person workshops were canceled. And yeah, then this thing happened of me finding out that I'm pregnant. In that moment, that just shifted a switch. And I just remember, like, in that moment, I just disconnected from my body, and I was like, okay, I'm gone, I'm done. This is too much. Then everything shifted. Yeah, and I have to take a moment to reflect how I want to share this video without it being a massive just trauma dumping, because yeah, in my personal life, like one traumatic event after the other happened, and I don't want to make this sound like I'm complaining when I'm listing all the hardships I and we as a couple had to go through, because overall I'm so grateful to be living here. But man, whew, it was hard, and it was hard for basically 3 years. So there was us in France, and this thing just happened during the pandemic, and it was really scary because yeah, or even like doctors' practices were closed down, and I was terrified of going to the hospital. So I'm saying we, but it was Ben, like so grateful for just like his engagement in this whole story and supporting me, because I was a mess. And so he was making all the phone calls, trying to find out, yeah, how the hell can we get an abortion during the strictest lockdowns in France, where I had no health insurance. Yeah, but luckily we found a midwife, and luckily France is like so progressive when it comes to having abortions and healthcare in some ways. So yeah, I was lucky to get access and do it at home and do it with a ritual actually close to that river that I love so much. So it was a very emotional experience, and also as a couple I think it brought us much closer together. And for me it was a moment of making the choice for this land and this journey of wanting to arrive here, instead of yeah, this other opportunity that opened up for a moment. From there it really continued with challenge after challenge, shitty housing situations. You know, you have to think of like being in this super rural area of France. You have only like these really old village houses. Most of them aren't insulated. Most of them don't have appropriate heating systems. In some places you don't have internet, what we both needed for our work. And it was just hard, like making it all work, like keeping up our work, making enough income, then scouting for places. Luckily we came to the conclusion that we both want to buy something here together, which was only possible due to the inheritance of my partner. I just want to mention that too, because I guess many people are curious, and I wouldn't have gotten a loan at the bank and my partner neither, so it really came down to privilege. But even then we didn't have a huge budget for buying a house, and like I just said, there are like a lot of village houses that have like situations with mold, and we also didn't want to be in a village. We wanted, yeah, to have land attached so we can grow our food and host people. And that turned out to be a challenge, because most places with land were over our budget, or there were some kind of issues. So I think it was 1 year of living in shitty housing situations, scouting for places, finding out what we can do with our budget. At the beginning we were quite naive, and we thought we could live in a yurt, or we could buy a ruin and renovate it. And I'm just so lucky that it didn't end up like this, because that was completely unrealistic. Like no way we could have made it work, like working and renovating a ruin. So yeah, thanks, that didn't happen. But after 2 years of exploring and trying out and failing and being confused and not knowing where to go, how to go about it, we finally found our house. We found it, and then I think we had to wait another 3 months, maybe even more, because there was some kind of construction permission missing when the barn, our house, was first converted. And like all of this French bureaucracy nightmare took place for several months before we could move in. And when we finally moved into our house, I thought things would finally shift. I had this image, of the safe space, of the nest arriving there. And I had this notion that when we would arrive there, that I would feel better, because after the abortion, I was just, in a state of trauma, and I couldn't drive a car because I was so hyper vigilant all the time. I sometimes couldn't leave the house because I was so anxious and my nervous system was just on the edge all the fucking time. And this stress to making it work with my self-employment, the whole bureaucracy nightmare. So it was just so many things coming together, and I had the wish, the dream, the idea that when we arrived in that house, that things would just calm down and I would feel better. But the opposite happened. It was so tough for me, because then there were so many first times and so many tasks we had to think of and that we had to bring order into and priority into. And I didn't know at that time that I also have ADHD, and that I'm probably on the autism spectrum as well. So now things make a lot of more sense, but back then I was just like, what the fuck is happening? This is the moment I have always dreamed of, like, for so long, and now it is here, and I'm just on the edge all the fucking time. I'm just stressed and overwhelmed all the time. I couldn't sleep. In the mornings it was so hard to get out of bed, and all the changes around the house were so challenging to me. Like every day the house looked different. It was never, a place to arrive. Of course not, because we were renovating. And for the first time, Ben and I, we had so many conflicts and fights. We were never fighting before. We rarely fight nowadays, so we're really not bumping heads a lot of times. But I was just so on the edge all the time. I was just exploding all over the place, couldn't regulate my emotions. And after 2 months or so, I had to get back to work again. Like, I took a break for 2 months or something for renovating, and I couldn't. I was physically, mentally not able to sit myself down, to plan, to execute, nothing. It didn't work. I felt, paralyzed. Now I know of ADHD paralysis, choice paralysis, executive dysfunction, sequencing challenges, all of these things that I already have when I'm in a healthy state, and there I was full on in a trauma state, so I just couldn't function anymore. And I didn't get it. I was like, what the fuck is going on? What's wrong with me? Then ADHD Awareness Month came, and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. When doing research, I listened to therapists who explained my whole life to me, and I was like, oh my God, this is me. This is happening right now. So it was dawning on me that I might have ADHD. And that brought a little bit of relief, because there was a possible explanation for what I've been experiencing back then. But that was not the only thing. After 3 months of being in the house, I got a call from Germany, my mom telling me that my father just had a stroke. So I went back to Germany, which was so challenging. Again, the start of the pandemic. The vaccinations were just coming out. The whole world was a mess. And I didn't know if my father would get to live or if he dies. So there was another period of just so much distress, uncertainty. My father was in a coma for 2 months, was on the ICU for 6 months. And while he was in hospital, his company burned out. So it was just like wild. Everything was just like, my whole world was just falling apart. And I was going through the ADHD assessment to that time, just like reliving my whole trauma and all my failures and shortcomings from childhood. Oh my God, it was just the worst time. And so I'm going to fast forward this because let's not get into this in detail. Just be aware a lot of shit happens for several months again before I even would get back to the house, to our new home. So yeah, now I would like to share a bit more about like the general things, like romanticized fantasies that I had about living in nature, that turned out to be different in reality. And I think many people have that. I have, yeah, quite a lot of exchange with people who have this dream, who want to move to nature, who want to live a life more close to nature. But then every time I also share on Instagram about fuck it's challenging, fuck it's lonely, fuck you need your car for everything. People are like, cool, thank you that you're sharing these points, because it's so easy to romanticize this process of moving countries, of moving to a remote area. Yeah, so I want to share a bit about that, about the fantasies we have and what it is like really. Something I just touched on is the thing of always needing a car. You can't just go get some groceries by foot. You can't just go walk around the block and meet a friend. For everything you need a car, so that takes away a lot of spontaneity. It's very difficult to, yeah, just for things to happen organically. Everything needs planning and organizing. And for me, it was super challenging because at the beginning, when we arrived in the house, I couldn't drive due to my trauma brain. I was not able to be in this old loud fucking van and drive it up and down tiny mountain roads. Like also driving here is a whole other thing than in cities. Then I had this notion of being embedded in community when I would arrive and actually live here, because that was my experience when traveling, of always being connected to new places, new people. I was like very open and this traveler spirit, so much more extroverted and having a whole different perspective, like looking to the outside and focusing on external things. And as soon as we arrived in the house, the whole focus of gravity shifted, because on one hand I really needed and wanted to create this safe space, but also there are the renovations, and so you're just so much more focused on your own little zone. And with the pandemic also there happened this weird break for me with a bit of the rainbow family and yoga community, which always was very much like what felt like home to me. But with all these conspiracy theories surfacing and also like some right-wing witty kind of stuff surfacing, I didn't feel connected to that kind of like hippie scene anymore, which was difficult because this was a whole big point of why I moved here, because the rainbow community had touched me so deeply here, and like experiencing people who live in community here and take care of each other's kids and just have lives very interwoven. But then suddenly I didn't feel comfortable singing mantras anymore, going to bhajan. So this split happened, and I still had some people I could go to, but suddenly I felt more of the differences than the things that would connect us. So that was and that is still challenging, because I've been realizing now, I've been living for longer here, that there's like, I call it hippie in quotation marks, because yeah, I don't really like that term. It doesn't really say anything, but just like this very heart open traveler community spirit, that was one phase of my life, and that is one part of me. But then there's also the Berlin city kid that still somewhere lives in me, and that likes to go to raves, or that misses queer community, and people who don't have these traditional values around family, because yeah, this is something that comes a lot with this rainbow family, and just like, yeah, having kids very at the center of things, which is amazing, because honestly this is something that is, I feel, so wrong in like modern culture and the societies and how cities are built, that everything, everybody, different age groups are so disconnected from each other. But suddenly I was like, well, I'm not a mama. I don't know if I ever want to become a mother. So where are the females, the childless females I can hang out with, or the queer folks, or the kinky folks? And this is something I haven't figured out yet. I have my friends that are dear to my heart, that that come to visit every now and then, that I have Zoom calls with, but now to have like these really, really hard people, soul kinship, I haven't found here yet. And I guess this is something I had really underestimated, how challenging it can be to find true friends when you're older. And yeah, you have this center of gravity shifted. We have the house, we have the garden, and it takes so much energy and focus to build something there. So it's so different to be a traveler and have like all this time to just connect with people. And it's also a different quality connecting while traveling. Often it's very surface level. You just meet, you experience something together, you share beautiful moments together, but it's rarely something of substance. You don't share everyday life. And as I said in the beginning, it's hard to share everyday life with people when you're so distant and everything is so far from each other anyway. So this is something I've underestimated, absolutely. I thought it would be super easy to find friends and community. And it's starting. It's starting, and it's such a different pace than in the city. When I just think of like the abundance of workshops and events and gatherings and whatever in Berlin, like here I found my contact improv group, and it's one workshop a month. And then if you can't go for whatever reason, PMDD for me, it's like, okay, so it's 2 months until I see them again. And then there's this thing with the seasons. In summer, sometimes some of the local activities stop because it's too hot, because everybody is in summer holidays. So there's kind of lack of just local things happening. Of course, there are like festivals, but then again, for nourishing local connections. Festivals aren't a thing to go to because most of them are far, even if they are close. So yeah, and in winter you have most of the restaurants closing, by example. We don't have any culture here. Like very little, maybe you find like one tiny exhibition of an artist here or there, but there's a real lack of like bigger public community spaces. That is something I just realized when living here, how spoiled people in Berlin are, having all these like old factory buildings with like huge ceilings, and here it's hard to find a space that is big enough to fit like a bigger yoga group into or host dancing spaces, because it's all of these like old village houses, and then they are far. So really developing community through like weekly happenings, it's tricky. It's tricky, dude. Another romanticized fantasy that I had was, once I will live in nature, I will spend all of my time in nature. I will spend so much time in my garden and just like out in the woods and na. But if you still have to perform wage labor to finance your existence, then you also have to do that when you live in nature. I know, surprise. And if your work isn't connected to doing anything in nature, so unless you're a farmer or facilitating events in nature, then I just have to spend the same amount of time in front of my computer doing design work, offering somatic coaching online. That's just the way it is at the moment. And I'm working on shifting that. So working more with people in nature. And something really, really wonderful is that we landed in a hamlet, so we are not completely isolated. And some of our neighbors share similar visions, so they are also renovating their house and wanting to offer workshops and retreats. So it will lead there. And I hope, I really have this desire of wanting to work more with the land and also have more connection with the locals. And it's all about space and time. And for me, it's still a lot of puzzling and trying to see what works, how can I make space with my design work or marketing coaching for doing more of that work in nature or somatic work. So it's still a big experiment, and there are a lot of challenges, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I am so grateful, and even though you will get the cabin fever from time to time and you go fucking nuts because sometimes it's just freaking boring in winter and you just want to hang out with your best friend and they are far away. I still believe that all of these things will come with time, and I think, there's this bigger wish of exploring how can we live more connected with nature, how can we live a life in tune with the seasons and build more community. So it's a price I gladly pay, that I sometimes feel lonely or bored or overwhelmed. I'm curious to hear how this lands for you. If you share this dream of living in nature, what places inside of you did this touch? Do you have maybe any questions, or just want to rant about the fact that it's so challenging to build a simple life, to lead a simple life during late-stage capitalism when everything is so fucking fragmented and disconnected? Please feel welcome to rant in the comments. If you've liked it, please leave a like, thumbs up, hit the subscribe bell, maybe send it to a friend, or maybe come by and say hi and let's hang out at the river. See you next time.